In a day and age where we have nearly unlimited options and opportunities, how do we live in a way that's meaningful and with purpose? And today's guest, Mark Manson, has explored that question deeply, and his no-nonsense attitude and style of writing has attracted millions and millions of readers to dive in. And today we're going to dive into that topic and more. So you're going to want to listen. Let's get right to it. This is the Investor Mindset Podcast. Welcome back to the Investor Mindset Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Pesavento, and today I have a very special guest. Mark Manson's in the studio today with me. How you doing, Mark?
I'm good, Stephen. It's good to be here.
Well, I am really grateful to have you. And for many of you guys know, Mark Manson is a 2 times #1 New York Times bestselling author whose books have sold over 13 million copies worldwide. And before he was an author, he was a blogger, which he started back in 2009. And today his site has more than 15 million people a year reading and learning. And he wrote a number of books, one that you guys often have heard about, Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, and the second popular book, Everything is Fucked, a book about hope, which I just think are both phenomenal titles. And I've personally read Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck a number of times, got a lot from it, so I super appreciate you putting this together. But often it's misunderstood at face value. You know, the Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck isn't a book about not caring, rather it's a book about caring about the right things. And I guess that's the subtle art. So Mark, what I'm curious about is when it comes to happiness, it's all about the art of caring about the right things. How did you come up with this? And can you tell us more about what that means?
Sure. So, I mean, the title's a little bit of it's kind of like a Trojan horse, you know, it's like people see it in the airport, they see it on Amazon, they're like, oh man, I wish I didn't give a fuck. And, you know, because we're all stressed and exhausted all the time. And then you get into the book and you discover like, oh, wait, hold on. You have to care about something. And actually, the quality of your life is determined by the quality of the things that you choose to care about. And that's where it starts to get very philosophical and personal. And for me, it was just, I started to notice over the years, both in my own life, but also in the lives of my readers who contacted me all the time, that, you know, with social media and the internet and all the information that's available to us, it's as amazing as it is, it makes it confusing to know what is worth putting a lot of investment into, putting a lot of our time and energy and emotion into. You know, when there's all of these opportunities and potential things that you could be doing with your life, or all these silly things on Instagram of people in front of beaches and, you know, and all these amazing locations or whatever, it becomes more complicated to know what is actually worth pursuing and what is actually worth a little bit of time we have in this world. So I wanted to write a book about that, about the kind of, to me, the most fundamental question of our day and age, which is, okay, you have access to everything now. What are you gonna use it for?
Yeah, it's so important to be asking ourselves this question about how do we have fulfillment, because we're in a world where everything is better by nearly every measure for society, especially for us that live in developed nations. But even those who don't live in developed nations often live better than any society or generation previous, but it doesn't always feel like that. So, I mean, how do we navigate this into a place where we can find true happiness and enjoyment in a world that is full of all these things pulling us in the direction of not feeling that way?
I think it's incumbent on all of us individually to understand the information environment that we live in. You know, so the nature of the internet is that we are always going to be exposed to like the top 0.0001% of whatever is happening in the world. And in some ways that's great. It's great to be able to have access to the excellent and extraordinary in every different way. But if that's all that you're paying attention to, if that's all that you're spending your time on, that starts to have psychological repercussions on you. You start to get this kind of skewed or distorted version of reality, and you start to believe that the world is that way. when it's not. And so for me, I've got this concept that I talk about in my second book called the attention diet, which is basically, the same way that at some point we had to learn to be very conscious and aware of the food that we were putting into our bodies. I think that we need to develop a consciousness and an awareness around the information that we are putting into our minds. That if you overindulge on many things, that it can make you mentally lethargic and obese.
Yeah. So you really have to be able to be intentional about what you're consuming, what information's coming at you. Otherwise, you're going to be in this spiral of comparison land where you're not going to be happy. And so what I'm curious is, how do you apply or identify the best balance of caring versus not caring, of focusing on the right information? How do you end up balancing saying, no, that doesn't matter, I'm just going to push that out, I'm totally fine with that, versus, obviously being a crazy person and not caring about anything?
Well, I think there's a few vectors to evaluate it on. One is just truth or evidence. You want to listen to people who are qualified and know what they're talking about. And just that alone is difficult to find these days. But I think also it's I think we have to be realistic in that, life is short, and generally we all only have enough time to become exceptional at one, maybe two things if we're like very hardworking and very fortunate. And so I think it's very important to get clear on what those handful of things are in our lives, whether, the one or two things in our business, professional career that we can be exceptional at, and double down on those, focus on those, and shut out things that distract us from those, but also apply it to our personal lives as well. It's find the handful of people that you're going to have the most meaningful relationships with and double down on those relationships. Find the hobbies that bring you the most joy and double down on those. Don't get distracted by all the other stuff that's out there. And so I just feel like that's the name of the game in every area of life right now is people who are best able to focus on their strengths and not get caught up in the whirlwind of nonsense that goes on online and on social media and in the world. Those are the people that are going to get ahead.
It's so hard though. I mean, it's so hard to not get pulled into it. And I notice for myself, I'm a person who doesn't watch the news nearly at all, but it's really easy when you kind of get a little hit of one of those stories and you get sucked in, and then all of a sudden you realize, like, why am I not feeling good? Why am I thinking negatively? Why am I in this state? And thinking negatively is normal, right? It happens to all of us, even if we're kind of pushed these positive beliefs. I mean, what's your take on that?
I think it's part of the problem is that everything is getting, all the information is getting very good at being addictive, so not just the entertainment industry, but the news media industry, a lot of the tech companies, like a lot of these big companies, they've figured out how to make things addictive, make products addictive, make services addictive. And so if you're not careful, it's one of those like, well, let me just click on this one site and see what they have to say or whatever. And you can end up in this spiral where, next thing you know, you've spent 3 hours or you've been upset the last 3 weeks and you can't stop reading stuff, or, it's like a lot of the news media right now, it's very similar to like a Netflix series where like it's very much designed and packaged in such a way that you just keep watching and you never stop. So for me, it's the skill set is all about is kind of paradoxically, it's self-limitation. The people who are most free right now are those who know how to set boundaries and limit themselves. It's the people who know to leave their phone out of the bedroom at night, or don't bring it into a meeting with a client or whatever. It's the people who are able to delete the apps that they waste time on from their phones and not reinstall them. Like that's like the new kind of, I'm pushing this new idea of freedom out into the world. And my argument is that it's true freedom right now comes from self-limitation. It comes from drawing those lines in your life and saying, like, this is what I care about. Everything else stays out.
Yeah, well, it's such an idea, right? Because boundaries, they sound like a bad thing when you're talking, but what it really does is that limitation gives you a structure to work within. Because when you have unlimited possibilities, limited options, things get pretty tough. I mean, I can imagine for somebody like you went from, being a relationship blogger, writing some, engaging content there. And then you transitioned and started writing on your own site about probably very similar topics, but, really pushing the paradigm of personal development in a totally different way. But then you wrote this book and it blew up. And I mean, before it blew up, you obviously had a very large audience, but how do you yourself go through the process of staying focused on the things that matter and keeping those boundaries in place when you went from, success to a whole nother level you maybe never could have even imagined?
It's a great question. And this is something that I talk about a lot. And it's something that, it's not exciting or sexy. Like, you're not going to see any, infomercials with this headline. But it's success can mess you up in that way. Like, success can bring you too much opportunity that you lose sight of what actually got you there in the first place. And so, when my first book blew up, it became wildly successful. I spent a year or two kind of like stumbling around, trying to figure out, like, okay, what do I do next? How do I top that? Do I even try to top it? People start coming at you with opportunities. I found myself like talking to my agent about like taking meetings about a TV show, and I'm sitting there like, we're having like a serious discussion about a TV show and how amazing it would be. And then I realized, I'm like, I haven't watched TV in like 4 years. Like, why would I create a TV show? This is the last thing I want to be doing with my life. So it's very difficult to say no to those sorts of things. It's very difficult to remember, when you've got all these like very shiny objects being dangled in front of you, to remind yourself of like, wait, no, this is the thing I'm exceptional at. This is the one thing that like, I do better than almost anybody else. And that's what got me here. And if I drift too far away from that, I'm going to sabotage myself. And so, I struggle with that for a couple of years, and it's very hard. So it's, one of the things I tell people is I say success can actually complicate, it can complicate your life in many ways. We like to imagine that success is going to fix everything in our life, that it's going to make everything happy and easier. But at least in my experience, it does the opposite in many ways.
Well, it's fascinating because it's like you get to this point, which is the pinnacle. I'm sure I'm going to have the number wrong, but I think Wikipedia mentioned 179 weeks in the top 10 on New York Times bestseller list. I mean, that's the pinnacle of success for a writer, is to be able to impact that many people, sell that many books. And when I found in my own life, when I've hit success in real estate, of course, not the same level of success, but all of a sudden it feels like there's a whole nother pressure. There's a whole nother level of expectation that things need to stay at, where sometimes that pressure is heavy and it really can weigh on you to make the right decisions, to make sure that you're not stepping in the wrong direction. And so how have you been able to narrow your focus and keep that boundary strong so that you're focused on your one thing?
It's, I think it's very important to have good people around you. People who will be honest with you, who aren't yes men. People who are like, hey, Mark, that's that's actually, are you sure you want to do that? Having those sorts of people it's unbelievably valuable. The other thing that I've had to kind of learn in the last couple of years is like there's an initial high that comes with a lot of opportunities, so somebody would reach out and say, well, hey, can you come to this event and do this, or can you work with this person, or whatever, and there's like a status high that comes with that. I'm like, oh, I'm going to meet this big celebrity and we're going to do this thing or that thing. And what I've learned is you have to give it enough time for that high to subside, because no high lasts. Everything gets old after a while. And so once that high kind of subsides, then I ask myself the question, okay, is this the sort of thing that I would be excited to do every day for like the next year? And in a lot of cases, it's not. It's like, oh wait, no, actually, that's not nearly, when I put it that way, it's not nearly as exciting as it was when it was initially offered. And so I think it's a lot of it has been framing things not in terms of like the immediate opportunity, but framing it more in terms of like the amount of time I'm going to have to spend over the next like 1, 2, 3 years. And when you start putting it that way, you're like, oh shit, I don't want to spend that much time.
Yeah.
And so it becomes much easier to let it go.
What a great question to frame it in your own mind so that you can think to yourself, well, I mean, it feels really good to have other people clamoring to work with me, to have them on a show like ours right now. Thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to be able to talk with you, but to be able to try to understand, well, hey, what is really going to fill me up? And so a question I have for you is, you talked about this idea of knowing what you're really good at, that you can only be really good at maybe 1 or 2 things. How did you discover that writing was one of those things for you?
For me, a lot of it is just trial and error. And the funny thing is I don't even know if I would say writing is even the one thing that I'm exceptional at. I think it's writing about human psychology, I think, is the one thing that for whatever reason, it's like, I've got that nailed. And for me, it was, like you said, I started I started my first internet business in 2008. It was a small e-commerce website, barely made any money. And I started a number of affiliate businesses. Then I tried to start a web design business, and then it was eventually through starting like 4 or 5 different businesses that I landed on a website that promoted relationship advice. And originally it wasn't even my own. It was, I created a website that would get traffic, and then I would promote like Match.com or some other thing, and I'd make a few bucks if somebody signed up. And then from there, I discovered that to grow that website, I needed to actually write about relationships. And so I started writing about relationships. And at first it was kind of the typical stuff of like, 3 things never to say on a date, or dumb stuff like that. What to do if she doesn't call you back. But then, as I started writing about that stuff, I'm like, man, this is boring. Like, let's actually get into why are we so insecure around dating and relationships? Why do we feel like incomplete if we don't have somebody in our life? And so I just wrote a few of those types of articles and threw them up. And next thing you know, I'm getting more traffic and visitors than ever before. And so I think when you don't know what that one thing is, you have to look at stuff that sounds a little bit crazy, sounds like off the beaten path. And then once you find it, it's one of those situations where you're like, wow, I put in like half the effort and I got 10 times the results, and let's keep doing that again. Let's do that more and more and more. And, I think it can work that way in any profession. There are many, many ways to be successful in real estate. There are many ways to be successful in investing. There are many ways to be successful in writing. It's about finding that particular aspect of yourself that differentiates you and sets you apart from everybody else in your industry. Like that's where your advantage is going to be.
I want to let that set in for people because it's huge. It's this idea of just trying things. You got to go through that struggle. And that really reminds me of this quote. And I hope it's not misattributed, but who you are is defined by what you're willing to struggle for, is something that you mentioned. And I feel like, have we forgotten the importance of that in our society today?
Yeah. I mean, I'm one of the crusades I'm always on is that people are too fragile.
Yeah. Amen.
It's and I'm not saying that like there are not legitimate problems and issues. There are a lot of legitimate problems and issues in the world right now, and a lot of people do suffer. But I guess my what I'm on a crusade against is our cultural attitude towards suffering. We've lost our tolerance for it. We've lost our tolerance for discomfort and pain. And I see that as a very dangerous thing.
Yeah, it's dangerous because everything can't be easy all the time. And it's through that struggle that we end up gaining so much strength and we get to know who we actually are.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes things worthwhile. It's like if you were just handed a bunch of real estate, you're just handed millions and millions of dollars worth of real estate, you'd be bored next month. You'd be like, oh, all right, well, that was fun for a while. It's the working for it that makes it meaningful. Like that's where the pride comes from. That's where the value, not financial value, but like the emotional value, the internal value. That's where it comes from.
Yeah. It's so true because it's through that journey of actually getting there and feeling that you're the one who caused that to happen. Otherwise you get the millions of dollars of real estate and you'd be like, well, what's next? What am I going to do now? Because you didn't actually get fulfilled. You ended up getting what you wanted, but it just appeared. So I think that's really smart. So I'm curious, shifting gears a little bit. Obviously, you've had a lot of success on your ability to be able to distill these ideas from psychology into a way that really appeals to people outside of the typical personal development space. And I'm very impressed by your website, specifically because you're one of the first people to bring the subscription model to play online and being able to bring, subscriber content to folks in the editorial space. And one of the things I really particularly appreciate is the fact that you're bringing in outside professionals to kind of vet your work and to make sure that the information you're putting out is really making a difference for people. So what I'm curious is, as you've been building this online community of people that you're serving, what are some of the biggest lessons that you learned in building that you could pass on to other people who are going to be in the same space, looking at building community and an audience within their own business, whether that be real estate, podcast, or something in between?
Man, it's a good question. It's a hard question. I think a lot of it comes down to really understanding like how do people respond to you in a way that's different than say somebody else. What is it like? Find that little piece of unique offering that you have that separates you from others, and just live in that space. I'm sure you've noticed it with this podcast. As people can get investment advice in a million different places. They can get real estate advice a million different places. It's ultimately, in this day and age, what we're attracted to is the human side of brands and companies and advice. And so it's the information has become very ubiquitous and cheap in a way. But it's the relationship and the community where most of the value is found. And so I think it's just really understanding, what's different about yourself, and then what's different about the people who come to you. What makes them stand out and makes them unique, and then just live in that that space that separates everything.
Yeah, it's such good advice, because you really have to figure out who are you serving, who's attracted to you. And for yourself, obviously you've carved out a very unique niche. I mean, how did you discover that for yourself, or how have you seen other people kind of make that discovery of what fits for you or what fits for them?
Well, with me, I started, I shifted my business's brand over to kind of straight up self-help advice around 2013. And, one thing that I just personally was kind of always frustrated with was, I grew up reading self-help books and watching seminars and stuff in my teens and 20s. And I had a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth. I spent a lot of money. Some of the advice was good, but a lot of it wasn't. A lot of it was overhyped and in my opinion, vastly overpriced. And so I had kind of a bone to pick with it. And I started asking myself, if I was to do self-help the right way, how would I do it? How would I change it? And a lot of the answers to that question kind of became what has made me stand out over the years. It's giving advice that's backed up by science and evidence, not just pulling a model out of my ass and selling it to people. That's the first one. The second one is being realistic about pain. It's like, you're not going to be happy all the time. I don't care who you are. I don't care how awesome your life is. Some days are going to suck, and you just got to get used to it. And being upfront with that with people. I think a lot of people find that approach refreshing. And then just also being honest about my own fallibility. I'm not some guy on stage who has all the answers. I'm a dude with the same problems you have. I have the same insecurities you have. Here's what's helped me, but the fight's not over. So instead of like me just throwing answers out there, like, let's have a conversation about it. So that's always been my approach. And I think I was fortunate in that the things that I felt were felt by a lot of people out there in the world. And I think, that's the case a lot of times. And to more specifically answer your question, a question that when I get approached by young bloggers or YouTubers or podcasters or whatever, a question that I throw at them is I say, what is something that needs to be said in the world and nobody is saying it? Go say it. Like that. That's what's going to make you stand out. And I think it's a powerful question too, because we all believe something different is not being said. What I think is important and not being said is going to be different than what you think is important and not being said. So we're going to have different answers to that.
Yeah. And that difference is what really kind of creates that authenticity with who you are, because I'm not trying to be Mark Manson. You're not trying to be Stephen Pesavento. You're not trying to be, some other personal development guru or teacher or trainer or writer. You're being you. And I think it really goes back to what you were saying earlier. Let me know if you disagree, but it really goes to trying things. You tried things, you wrote, you saw what really hit, what really made sense, what people liked. And it happened to be something that you also 100% were ready to go all in on. So It kind of wraps everything together that, if you figure out what it is that you care about and you're willing to put that out into the world and you keep trying things, that at the end of the day, you might end up in a place where you're going to be really satisfied and happy, but it won't always be that way.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, this has been amazing. I want to point people to go check out your books. Obviously, you've got some phenomenal books, as well as markmanson.net, some great articles, tons of free content, as well as some premium content that you guys will get a lot from. Where else would you like people to find out more about you or get in touch?
Check out the website. And then I've also got a free weekly newsletter called Mindfuck Monday, where I send out 3 ideas each Monday morning to kind of get people's brains rolling for the week. You can just find that markmanson.net/newsletter. But yeah, that's it.
Wonderful. We'll include all of that in the show notes for all of you guys who have been listening. Mark, thank you so much for being here with us. Thanks for philosophizing and sharing some of your beliefs with us so that we might be able to run with those and make some changes in our own lives.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Investor Mindset Podcast. If you like what you heard, make sure to rate, review, subscribe, and share with a friend. Head over to theinvestormindset.com to join the Insider Club, where we share tools and strategies from the top investors and entrepreneurs on how to take it to the next level.